Alright, so this will be picking up part 2 on the timing chain gasket redo video. So I have everything I need to redo this potentially the right way now. I have the early model gaskets and I have all the little other bits and pieces that will finally need to be replaced, like the sleeve for the harmonic balancer, more shop towels, more brake clean, you know, the basic essentials. So let me just show you guys everything that I have and we'll get right into it. I have the little ring which is going to go around this part on the harmonic balancer to help with the oil seal, and then down here I have a new distributor cap. I have new gaskets off to the side. I have spark plugs. I have a new distributor rotor, and then a bunch of new sealant and the gaskets as well, which I'll show you guys in a second the differences between the older and the newer gaskets. But the idea here is that we're going to be taking this all apart again in order to remove the old gaskets, which is like the 82 to 85 ones, and instead we're going to redo it now with the 81, like 22R 2.2 liter timing chain cover gaskets, because that is what the timing chain kit from this company LCE uses in order to fit the dual row on the later gen 22RE. So I'm just going to kind of brush past disassembling it, but when I get to the point where we'll be reinstalling it, then we'll pick up there. Okay, so what we have laid out here is the original single row timing chain cover and the dual row timing chain cover. Now, if you're looking at them side by side, not a lot looks very different at a glance. However, if you look closely and you look at the right side of it, more importantly, you can see on this jacket here, it's a rounded part for the water jacket at the top. Then, when you go and you look at the single row, squared top up here. And the only thing that I can theorize is possibly the issue is the gaskets that I'm using, since we're trying to use this cover for the dual row, but I've been using single row gaskets. Maybe the squared edges on the water jacket are what's causing water and coolant to get by and creating the potential leaks and the coolant mixing issue that I had before. That's the only assumption that I have based on what I can see. So with all of that information out there and all of that cleared up, I can get back to the focus of the video, which is getting rid of the oil leaks on my car and doing it in a way that water and coolant are not going to mix, because that was what happened to me previously, and now we're back doing it all again with the new gaskets. However, I have run into another issue, and at this point, I had everything apart. I took off the old cover. Well, I took off the cover again, and part of my head gasket broke, as you can see. And at that point, I'm not sure if I can get away with ripping this off and just using RTV, or if I'm gonna have to pull the head and do the entire head gasket. So at this point, I decided I was gonna go ahead and replace the head gasket. I already got my new head gasket, new intake manifold gasket, and I bought new head bolts as well, because I read that you should really replace them if you're removing them. Apparently the threads can stretch and they say it's not good when you try and reuse them too many times, so I bought new ones. So realistically, I should have everything I need at this point in time. So yeah, I guess without further ado, let's get started and I'll show you guys what we're working with. What I'm gonna start doing is clearing things out. Broke all of the exhaust manifold nuts and bolts loose. I did also get the oxygen sensor out. However, I still have to get the bolts loose that hold the exhaust manifold to this pipe right here. I sprayed it with WD-40 a little bit. I think it's just 2 or 3, so I'm gonna try to get under the car and get those out. That way I can take this all the way off and pull it out of the bay. Okay, so as you guys can see now, I was able to pull out the manifold. There is 3 bolts that hold it here. I was able to get most of these with ease. For the most part, I only got one, which I believe was this one, from underneath the car with a really long extension. The other 2 I was able to use a ratchet and then just a ratcheting wrench to get off. However, in order to get the entire manifold off, I didn't just take off these studs and then these 3. I also had to disconnect, if you look down here, 2 bolts that hold this bracket where it connects to the trans. Those had to come off so that the exhaust had some play in it in order for me to wiggle the manifold and be able to pop it out. And what I'm gonna move on to next is flipping over to the intake manifold side of things, where we'll take a look at all the harness and injectors and everything that has to come off in order to get that out. I'm not 100% sure what the best way to go about this is. In a perfect world, it'd be really nice if I could just take off the entire thing in one piece. However, I just have a feeling that wouldn't really work. but I think I may try by doing that first. So I'm just gonna start pulling all the bolts that would hold it to the head first. From what I can see, there is 4 bolts on the top. We have one in front of the thermostat, one behind it, another one next to that, and then one at the very back. The next ones that I'm going for are starting to be underneath. I can see 3 on the front of the intake manifold. I'm gonna guess that there's probably 3 in the back. A little tough to see, but you can see them lined up there. 1, 2, 3. So I'm gonna stake those off now. Alright, so I have the intake manifold actually fully removed with everything still attached to it in one piece, and I've just pushed it off to the side. It took a little wiggling, but I got it off and everything looks pretty alright. So I think at this point we should be clear to pop the valve cover off again and move forward with actually breaking loose the head bolts. I also disconnected a grounding line, which is right here. There's a 12mm that runs a line from here to here on the firewall. What I'm now looking at doing is probably going to be pulling the front cover off again, and we will have to actually disconnect the chain and remove that. Once that is off, we should be able to leave the guide rails and stuff attached to the block. However, then what we should be able to do is remove the head studs and start actually lifting the head off the block. Alright, so I removed the timing chain tensioner now, which was just the 2 12mm bolts holding it in, and took that off. And now what I'm going to do is take one of these Allens on a socket, and I'm going to loosen the one guardrail that is still applying tension to the chain. So for those of you that may not have known, the left timing chain guide is actually adjustable. You'll have to adjust it when you're installing your timing chain. And I've loosened the 2 Allen head bolts holding that in, so now we have the slack back in the chain that we'll need in order to remove it. At this point, we're pretty much good. We can start cracking loose the head bolts. That is going to be a 17mm. And I read that you should be doing it in a out to inner formation. That way you release the tension on the head correctly and it doesn't warp as you're removing it. Alright, I have no idea how this is gonna go or how difficult it will be to lift, but let's give this a shot. Ooh, there it goes. Ooh, it's dripping everywhere. Alright, we did it. That feels like a pretty big accomplishment as it is, so round of applause for that.
Hooray!
Now we can pop that off, and everything otherwise looks pretty good. So the next steps are going to be cleaning everything, including the block and the head, and making sure that there's no debris left from the previous gasket. Once that's completely cleared, we will be good to start reassembling everything. Alright guys, so it's a new day. I left off last with completely removing the head, and the block is pretty open now. As you can see, everything's cleared, and I spent a long time off camera just scraping away, cleaning all the surfaces, using brake clean, a razor blade, some rags, just everything that I could to get debris off and make sure that this is as smooth as possible. It feels really good as it is right now. There honestly wasn't a lot on there, mostly just head gasket material that had stuck to it when I pulled it off. I'm pretty sure the last people, they rebuilt the engine before I got it, but they only had photos to show that they did it. However, from what I could see, it does look like they decked the head and the block, so realistically, there should be nothing wrong with these as they stand. As you can see, all the head bolts are in, and I've hand threaded them in as far as I can get them. What I will begin doing now is going to be the first round of torque on the bolts themselves. The user manual from Haynes says 58 foot-pounds. In order to be safe, I want to do it in like at least 2 sequences. So I think what I'm going to do first is get them up to 30, and then the final round will be like 58. Additionally, what is very good to note is the actual sequence that we have to torque these in, meaning which one following the next one. according to online, you want to move from the inside out. So you'll go from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 3, and then from 3 you'll jump across to 4 here. And then you'll continue doing that sequence by going to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So everything is pretty much snug, and the rocker assembly is now flat to the top of the head. What I'm going to do is that first wave, and I'm going to do it at 30 foot-pounds. Okay, so I got all the bolts started and they're somewhat tightened down. However, what I realized is my torque wrench broke. With my luck, for whatever reason, it is no longer clicking when you reach the desired torque, and it just keeps going. So I stopped with my sequence that I was doing, and they're like halfway there maybe. I'm really not sure because it didn't click. They're tight, but they're not like super tight from what I can tell. So I'm gonna have to wait and put this off until I can go warranty the torque wrench and get a new one. So what I'm thinking is, in the meantime, at least since the head is on and it's mounted and it's like, you know, centered to where it needs to be, I can continue by putting on the intake manifold with the new gasket for that, and doing the same thing for the exhaust manifold and the exhaust manifold gasket, because at least everything is where it should be, so I can make some progress on that side of things in the meantime. Alright, so I got most of the exhaust manifold started, and it's pretty well mocked up with the new gaskets in place, but I'm going to leave it a little loose until I get the intake manifold side of things put back on, because there's one heater core line that actually runs behind the head, and it's kind of blocking from where I can reach the transmission bolts that hold the exhaust up. This line right here, as well as this line over here, are the ones that I'm referring to. This piece right here is actually connected all the way over to the intake manifold. I think it's one of the coolant lines, and I'm just gonna leave the exhaust side of things here for now while I get that side situated, and for that I'm gonna have to start doing some RTV like I was saying before. So we're basically just gonna mock up the intake manifold, and I'm gonna put the RTV on the gasket, let it sit for a little bit, and start threading those bolts in so that we can secure that back to the head and keep this train moving. Alright, so I've made a lot of progress. As you can see, I have the exhaust manifold loosely fitted back on, and the intake manifold is on. However, even though it is bolted on, I don't have it fully together. I'll show you guys that there's a line that goes basically from the middle here where we have the coolant temp sensor. It goes down under the intake manifold, back around the head, and it comes back up to here for this heater core line. And it looks a little bit like this. The way it works is this connects underneath the intake manifold, it runs all the way back behind the head, and it comes up here. And the issue I'm having is I can't get the intake manifold back on and attaching this pipe at the same time. So what I think I'm going to have to do is pull the intake manifold again. I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, the only way that I can get that line and the intake manifold back on is if I first put that line in position and then put the manifold back on. I tried putting it all on with the line connected to the intake manifold and tried to fit it all back on. However, that line was getting hung up on like the top of the fuel filter, which mounts to the side of the block. And I think that this is just a clearance issue. I've been watching a bunch of other head gasket videos, but no one that I've seen so far has covered this. So really there's nothing else left for me to do except pull this off again and try to put the line in first and then mount it back together. Okay, so after looking at this problem for a while, I think I've found a solution, which I'll explain to you guys. So the issue is fitting this line, which is supposed to loop around right around here. It's supposed to go underneath this little bolt hole on the head and also behind the fuel filter bracket here. Now I think what I'm realizing my mistake is that this line should have been routed in place before I put the head back on and torqued the bolts to spec. And that's because there's no way to get this behind these. So what I'm gonna do instead, because I know you can access the fuel filter, as difficult as it is, you can get to it from underneath the intake manifold because I've changed it before. So what I'm thinking I will do is remove the fuel filter, which I did already disconnect the two 12s that hold it to the bracket, and then I'm gonna remove these two 12s here that hold the bracket to the block. That way, with this out of the way, I can put the line back into place, Then we'll put the manifold back onto the head, and then I can go back and put the fuel filter bracket and filter back into place. Okay, so we've had a good success here. As you can see, the line is right underneath there. What I said worked exactly as I thought. The only thing that's a little different is that the fuel filter is actually held to the block with 3 bolts. There's 2 that are like right behind the filter, and then there's 1 lower one. So I'm gonna continue assembling from here, and we should be in good shape. Okay, getting that back on, at least getting the fuel filter back on, was a huge pain. I forgot how annoying it is trying to get your hands under the intake manifold, but it is possible, and I did get it. So that leaves this side pretty much done. The only things really left here is obviously like the intake pipe and of a couple of the vacuum lines over here, but I'm gonna leave them off. What we still need to do is fully connect the exhaust manifold, so I'm gonna tighten that back down. And what I'll be doing is starting by tightening it to the block, then I will tighten the 3 nuts that hold it to the mid pipe, and then the 2 bolts that hold all that to the trans. The reason for that is the most important part on our exhaust is getting a good seal from the head to the exhaust manifold. I'll start by tightening those and making sure that's all sealed before moving on to anything else. If I was to tighten the ones going from the manifold to the pipe first, it could force the manifold to sit at a weird angle and not seal as good as it would if we tighten the manifold first. Alright, so those of you who are probably smarter than me know that that was wrong, so scratch what I just said. You're honestly better off tightening those 2 bolts that hold that bracket to the bell housing before you tighten any of these. I tightened all these and it locked this in place, which then misaligned those down there. So what I started with was that little like a M8 or 13mm bolt that is connected at the top of the bell housing. It's the one at the top of the bracket right there. I don't know if they're all supposed to be 13s or maybe mine was replaced at some point, but it's hard to get to since I don't have a lot of 13mm tools. So I tightened that one, and I have the other one that's like the larger one that goes through the bell housing. That one's started. All these are loose, so what I'm gonna do now, I guess, is tighten down the bigger bell housing one and then go back through and tighten again the 3 exhaust manifolds at the bottom and then all the ones on the head here. Alright, so the exhaust is now finally good to go, which is awesome news. The intake manifold should also be good to go, which is even better. So just to quickly recap everything we've done, both the exhaust and the intake manifold are now fully buttoned on and tightened, as I said. In addition to that, I have the heater core line hooked up in the back. I also reattached our throttle cable, which is good to go. And at this point, obviously, of course, as well, our head gasket and head bolts are both new and tightened and torqued to spec. And so at this point, we should be good to go on putting the timing chain back in and starting to actually do what we came here for originally, which is resealing the timing chain cover. Now that we're at this point, there's a few things I want to address that I'm going to be approaching differently. The primary thing of that being is the way I've been cleaning the block in order to mate it to the gaskets. Previously, every time I did this, I was spraying brake cleaner onto a towel and wiping it, and it was getting clean, but I didn't really think it was getting as clean as it could have been. So this time around, I'm going to be extra thorough, and I'm basically just going to hose down the front of the block with brake cleaner to make sure it is completely free of impurities. And now that we have the chain off, I'm going to be doing that while the chain is off, and I can get as clean of a surface as possible. So essentially what I'm going to do now is we're going to take the valve cover back off. I'm going to undo the timing chain cover. I'll clean the entire front of the block to hopefully give us the best seal possible. And then what we'll do is we'll reassemble the timing chain. I've been careful to keep our camshaft as well as our crankshaft both exactly where they were when we disassembled this, so it's still perfectly in time as it sits right now. But we will reinstall that chain exactly as it sits, and then I can put in the new gaskets like I discussed with a very clean surface, and we'll apply RTV in a thin layer over the entire thing, whereas before I was beating it onto the gaskets and letting it compress. This time what I want to do is put it on the gasket and basically smear it over like peanut butter on the entire coverage of the surface. Then we will put it on, let it set, bolt everything in place. That's basically the rundown on how I want to approach this time. Okay, so the whole chain and guide rails are loosely assembled. I didn't tighten the Allen bolts holding the guide rails in yet, just because I wanted to take a moment to show you guys this. So obviously we have the adjustable one over here on the left, which has a little bit of room to tighten against the chain. Once I lock that into place is when we will go ahead and start to put the tensioner on. And I sprayed it all with brake clean like you saw before. However, there's some oil passageways that are obviously leaking a little bit, so I'm going to spray it again before putting everything back together. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a little bit of brake clean on a towel, and I'm going to wipe the underneath of the head gasket that's fresh here now to make sure that has a good seal as well. I'm making a lot of progress today, which is awesome. I'm really trying to get this car back on the road as soon as possible. Alrighty, so the timing chain is fully back on. I've got the cover back on because it's getting dark, so I'm basically wrapping up for the day. Put the valve cover back on just so when I leave it overnight, it doesn't get exposed to anything. But it is finally starting to look like an engine again, guys, which is awesome. What we will resume on when I pick this back up is probably going to be putting the cover back on now, because I don't think there's anything else I can do until that's on, and we'll pick up with that. I'll see you guys then. Alright guys, we are back again with another day. As you can see, my jobs get chopped into a lot of different days of a little bit of work. That's the only way I can really make it happen. But with that said, let me show you what I've gotten done. So there's way more stuff back together now. I kind of cut a lot of that out because you guys have seen me do it before in the past, and I've explained it, and there's tons of videos out there, so I figured I would brush past that, and I've just started working and putting everything together. I believe where we last left off, I had been getting ready to put the cover with the gaskets back on, and that is all done. I made sure to thoroughly apply RTV on the new gaskets. I let it tack up, and then I tightened everything down, and then I double checked that everything was tight again before starting to reinstall stuff. We have the AC compressor back on. I have the water pump on. We have our power steering bracket and power steering pump, as well as the idler pulley for power steering. I've also put in the splash tray again, which I've had out for a very long time. I finally put that back in just to make the car feel a little bit more complete as we're getting through things. I also threw in the exhaust shield, and I've started to reconnect some of the vacuum lines, but I haven't finished them because I do still need to torque the camshaft bolt to spec, which will be 58 foot-pounds when we do that. And once that is done, then I will bolt down the valve cover and put the rest of the lines back on. Once that's done, I can hook up the ignition wires again, and then what we can do is continue by putting the belts and the radiator back in and starting to fill up the fluids again. Now before I put the oil in, there is one more thing I want to do. The car is still on jack stands because what I want to do is I want to tilt it to the left from here so that I can drain even more oil out and potentially get out any more contaminants from when the coolant mixed. I'm just trying to do that to be as thorough as possible and make sure that if any debris fell into there or any coolant is still left in the oil pan, I get it out before filling it back up and trying to start it. Another thing I will do just to be cautious is because the car hasn't ran in so long and I had it apart for a while too, what I will do is I'll leave the ignition coil disconnected and I'll just crank it over to get some oil flow and oil pressure into it before I actually try to start it. That's a lot of stuff to check off on our to-do list, but I'm confident that we can get it done in a timely manner, so let's get to work. Throwing a little bit of blue Loctite onto this crankshaft bolt just in case, giving it a little extra grab. Okay, so after jumping in and out of the car a couple times, I got it to the foot-pounds needed for the crankshaft bolt by throwing it into fifth and putting the wheel chocks in front of the rear tires. So now I'm gonna spin it back to top dead center of cylinder 1 and get the distributor put back in. So I got the distributor ready to go here, and I have some oil so I can just lubricate all the O-rings on it before we put that back on. So I'm putting this back in, making sure we get the rotor pointing to top dead center cylinder 1, which is this like roughly like 10 o'clock position, 10, 11 o'clock. Go. And I had paint marks here so I know exactly where my timing is set to, just to make sure I keep that consistent. We might have to readjust after this is all done, but we'll see. Now, like I said, I have the new distributor rotor as well as a new cap, so let's throw those in while we have the chance. It just slips right off like that. I did actually bend this one a little bit on accident, so it really needed to be replaced no matter what. And these are super cheap on Rock Auto right now. They're only like a few dollars. Now, to make sure I keep the ignition wires all in order, all I'm going to do is take our new cap, put it next to our old cap, and I'm just going to swap over the wires one by one. That way, when I take it off of the one that says number 1, I can just put it right back onto the one that says number 1. Since I'm here too, I think I'll grab some dielectric grease so I can just throw that on the ends of this, make sure the connections stay good. With all of that being done now and everything tightened and the vacuum line's pretty much good to go, I can proceed by putting in the cooling system again. So that's going to be our water pump pulley with the fan. We're still running the clutch fan, so that'll go back in, as well as the radiator and shroud, and hooking up our upper and lower radiator hoses as well. So let's do that right now. Alright guys, so we are pretty much on our last day of work, and as I'll show you in a minute, the Celica is really 100% put back together. The only thing left for me to do now is just put in the coolant, and then what I'll probably do is I'll put the battery on a charger for a little bit. Since it's been sitting for like 2 months, it's probably dead or very low. But as you can see, it's really all back together. Everything is here. The only thing I'm still missing is that little AC idle up, but that shouldn't make any difference because I'm not even running the AC right now. The belt is completely disconnected. The only concern might be a vacuum leak. However, I've left these loose before and I had no issues. The little idle up thing, just one of the stems broke off, so that's the only reason it's out for now. Other than that, everything is pretty much as it was before. The only other difference is that we now have new gaskets and O-rings in a lot of places. So I put a new O-ring in the power steering. There's a new O-ring on one of the heater core lines that goes to the intake manifold. There's new seals in the intake manifold gasket, as well as the exhaust manifold gasket. And we've also removed our cruise control, and I put a block off, if you can see right here, this rubber cap where there was a vacuum line. There might be more that I'm missing, but that's pretty much going to be it. What I'm thinking I will do first is we'll put the coolant in, and what I want to do is actually, before I even start it, I want to leave the ignition disconnected, and I want to just crank it and maybe do a quick compression test on each of the cylinders as a good measure to make sure everything is safe. Alright, so this is the last day working, and for all intents and purposes we should be completely done. Now, like I said, the only thing left that I'm going to do is compression test each of the cylinders to make sure that we're good before I start it, to avoid any possible mishaps. So I've pretty much topped up the coolant system, but just in case, I have the bleeder right here with more water in it in case there's any air bubbles that find their way out while we're cranking the engine over. And I have the primary ignition coil disconnected here and pulled to the side, so there's no chance that this is going to start. Now, I also have the compression tester hooked up to cylinder 1. This is a relatively cheap tester, so I don't know how accurate it is going to be. The main thing that I'm going to be looking for is a relatively high number and something that is consistent across the board with each of the cylinders. So I've charged the battery overnight. That's hooked up and good to go. So all we really have left to do is to jump in the driver's seat, crank it over a couple times on each cylinder. After a couple cranks, cylinder 1 is at about 150, which is pretty good. As you can see, cylinder number 2 coming in at about 150 as well. Just a hair under 150, but still looking pretty good. We're going to move on to the last cylinder now. Coming in at 150 on the nose. Alright, so now that we have the confidence that the Celica engine is in good health and it's making good compression across the board, according to online and Toyota manuals, ideal compression is around 170 psi per cylinder, and while we're only putting up 150 on ours, that is only because it is a dry test. My main concern with doing this test was just because I'd never done a head gasket before, and I wanted to make sure I had everything done correctly. These engines are pretty simple, so I didn't have a lot of concern, and the motor was rebuilt before I got the car. However, I didn't have anything to verify that other than photos that the previous owners had sent me about it, so it left a little bit to be guessed on how good of a job was done and what parts were replaced and what wasn't. So at least now I have the confidence knowing that the motor is in pretty good health, especially after I did all this work, and we can put away the oh no box with the compression tester. With all that said, we should be in the clear to try and start the car. For the time being as well, I've also capped off those AC idle up lines just since I haven't been able to fix that little sensor in time, so we're just going to leave it off and unplugged as is for now. Otherwise, we should be golden. I'm going to get a 12mm in case we have to adjust the timing, but I'll re-plug in our primary ignition coil and we should be good to go. Okay, we will now go ahead with the first attempt at starting it, since redoing the timing chain cover gaskets for probably the 4th or 5th time, and also replacing the head gasket as well as many other O-rings, seals, gaskets, and the sorts. So let's give it a shot and hope for the best. So to rule one thing out really early on, I just went and replaced all the spark plugs with pre-gapped ones from Denso. The old ones that I took out weren't really that old actually. They only had maybe 10,000 miles on them, which is plenty of time before they should be replaced again. Usually it's about 30,000. But I'll show you the ones that I pulled out. So going across from cylinders 1, 2, 3, and 4, if you were basically just going from front to back of the motor, they don't look too bad. They're pretty normal wear. They're not fouled either, which is interesting because that's what I thought. Maybe since I was starting it and I still had the fuel system connected, maybe they were fouled out from getting too much gasoline in the cylinders. But what I'll do now is I'll try to start the car again and we'll see what happens. So despite the new plugs, same result, no success. It's basically running on like 1 or 2 cylinders, and as soon as you give it gas, it dies. I do have the check engine light on, so I'm gonna Google what that could mean and also double check some of the other things for timing. So what I'm doing now is actually just putting back in the old rotor and rotor cap for the distributor. I also don't think that this would be the cause of our problem, but I just want to rule out that, you know, at least rule out the possibility that the new parts may or may not be an issue. So just for checking off a few more things on our list, I'm going to do that and then see where we land. If these aren't the issue, then there's only a few other things that I believe could be the issue. One of those being that maybe our cam and crank are a hair out of sync, which would mean just popping off the camshaft gear and rotating the chain one. Or even easier would be maybe the distributor is off by 1 or 2 teeth, and all we'd have to do for that is the same thing, just pop it out and readjust it 1 or 2 teeth depending on how bad the error of margin looks. But first I'm going to give it another shot with the old distributor cap and distributor rotor in and see if that does anything for us. It did not. So what I'll check first, since it'll be far easier, is the timing of the distributor. So I'm going to turn the engine over until we're at top dead center for cylinder 1, and then we can check where the distributor is sitting time-wise and make sure that is exactly where it's supposed to be. Okay, so the engine is currently at top dead center. You can see it's at the 0 timing mark, and it is for cylinder 1, which we can identify by these rockers being loose. So that's all confirmed. However, the last confirmation would be for our distributor, which should be pointing towards cylinder 1. Now, if we take our cap and you were to look at this for where cylinder 1 would be, it appears to be just shy of where it should be firing for top dead center cylinder 1. So what I'm going to do is pull it out and we're going to try and hit it 1 tooth to the right going clockwise so that this will come just a hair forward more. So as you can see, I've tweaked it and it is just a hair more upright, which is good. It's exactly what we want. Okay, so the distributor was off. I now realigned it back to where it should be. So with that done, let's give it another shot at firing up the car and seeing how it runs. Alright guys, so with much excitement, we can now say that the Celica is running strong again. And as we know, the compression is good. I've checked the oil actually, and so far it seems like we did a really good job sealing it this time and that there's no leaking between the coolant and oil passages, which is a huge relief to hear, thanks to not only the new gaskets, but spreading the RTV across everything, double, triple checking that everything was tightened and torqued correctly, and just making sure everything was super clean when we reapplied it all so that there was no debris that could create a problem with the seal. So that's a huge relief, and I'm really excited to have the car running again. There is still a few more things that I want to dial in before I start driving it frequently again. which was going to be setting the ignition timing and doing the valve lash. And I'm gonna save that for another video because I'm sure this is dragging on at this point. But thank you guys for watching as always. I really hope that you are as excited as I am with the outcome, and I'm just happy to have my car back. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.